You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of work. It's a topic you have heard bits and pieces of in past episodes, but my guest today is someone I've known for a number of years. We actually met during the Great Recession in the 08-09 timeframe. We've stayed in touch and, had opportunities to share some things over the years. His name is Ira Wolfe. Ira, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Doug. It's great to be back with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
this is how we started, isn't it?
I think we did a radio thing back in the day, the very first thing we did together, collaborated on. But so it's a little bit of a custom here, Ira. I asked my guests to share a little bit of their background and journey. And I know for those of us that have been around a little longer, that story's long, but give us the flyover. How did you get to where you are today?
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, as an older baby boomer, there's obviously lots of lessons, lots of stories. The long and the short of it is, I guess the biggest surprise that everybody has is I started my career over 40 years ago as a dentist. I loved everything about dentistry but dentistry. Which means I loved running the business. I loved the entrepreneurship. I liked the marketing, loved working with the patients. I liked working with I was involved in the community. I like marketing it. And those are all transferable skills. And my daughter graduated college in May or June of 1995. And I told my partner that I had brought in that I was leaving. One of us, I was either buying him out, he's selling, or he was buying me out and he could stay. And I started another business. It evolved, and everybody assumed it would be consulting with dentists, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. It ended up, I always liked the problem solving. In business, they call it critical thinking skills. In healthcare, it's differential diagnosis. So I always joke, I said, I went from having insurance pay my differential diagnosis to being forced to have businesses pay my critical thinking skills. But I loved the diagnostics, and along the way I fell into HR, did pre-employment leadership testing, but my fascination's always been on the future. I was computerized, just to go back, I was computerized in 1987. So we were one of the first 100 practices in the country. I always loved the technology, I always seized upon it. And applied it. So it was an easy progression. And then through the last 30 years, I've just followed, what the future was going to be, wrote a number of books, sold my company last year, still focused on the future of work, still trying to figure out how can we help people get more comfortable with the change that's coming. And that's my current passion and pursuit.
That's one of those threads that you and I share. I think we're both early adopters, and it's interesting you pegged 1987. I had the same experience. I was running a large administration group at the bank where I worked, and in 1987, our IT guys came around and said, hey, we've got this thing called desktop computing. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. And I was the first department in the bank to do a widespread distribution of PCs on the desktop for my team to do their work. And I've always been an early adopter, and I know the joke is the early guys get the arrows in their back, and I've had a few of those too, but I've always been very enamored with it and tried to be kind of out on the leading edge with it. So I get that mindset, and that's probably another reason you and I resonate with each other.
Yeah, what's funny is just going back, and these are the things that pop into your head. And I'm teaching a class on innovation and entrepreneurship, realizing that I made some reference. There's two things I want to just jot down here. I made a reference to something about 9/11, and realized then I stopped and realized, like, how many of you were around for 9/11? And one hand sort of went up, and he goes, I was 2 weeks old.
Yeah.
So out of 19 students, there was like somebody that was 2 weeks old and 9. So a lot of the things of when you use a reference and you understand what when you talk about the future of work, but what the sequence was, what the reference point is. We think is we're living in the future of work, and everybody who was born in the last 20 years is living in the present.
Right. Right.
This is all they know. But going back to 1987, they upgraded me to. They said if you upgrade your hard drive, you'll be set for life.
I know
20
where you're going
megabytes.
with this story.
20 megabytes.
Yeah.
I can't do a short reel on this thing for 20 megabytes.
Right. Right. I know. No, I had that same experience, both with the memory in the machines and the hard drive size. Yeah, we were
Yeah, we had a
constantly
they
upgrading.
upgraded me. Yeah, they upgraded me to a 386 computer. It just came out. It was
Yeah.
like state of the art 386. So the workstations were
Oh, I
286.
know.
Yeah.
I know. And apologies, there's a bunch of people listening to this right now that have
No,
no idea what
no
we're
idea.
talking about. But anyway, suffice it to say, that's part of the future of work is looking at things that are coming. So let's dive straight into that. Can you summarize what your view of the next chapter may look like in the work world right now?
Yeah, it's terrifying and fascinating. Yeah, that's my tag. One of my taglines up on LinkedIn for anybody who wants to connect with me. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, it's. I'm obviously we're fascinated by it. This is, we geek out about some of the stuff that's coming, but it's equally terrifying. And to maybe this reference will help people. For as fast as things are changing today, as quickly as things, and we talk about VUCA. I've been talking about that since we probably met for 20 some years. And VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we won't go into the history of it unless you want to, but most people didn't understand it. It's like, well, that's not for me. We live in a small town America, or we're in a small business, or we're 60 years old. That's irrelevant. So people sort of blew off VUCA until February and March of 2020. And then they
Right.
got it.
Right.
And then it was like, yes, this is what VUCA is. It's volatile. It happens quickly. Where it goes is uncertain. It's really complex, and nobody has an answer. Uh, and so we're living in this VUCA world that keeps accelerating, and people just say, "Oh, well, we're past the pandemic. We'll get back to normal." Well, my description of that is never normal. But if we go back to the computer side, is we are on the verge of not only this rapid change, but quantum computing. And just to give people a reference, the fastest computers in the world, and it's about 50 of them, called supercomputers, are already like 100 million times faster than what we have as an ordinary laptop. So if you have the very, very fastest laptop available, which most of us don't, but if you have the very fast, it's already many, many times faster than that. And that's important because the thing that's holding us up now, the things that's holding up AI, and the thing that's holding up many changes is the speed at which the computers work. They can't deal with ChatGPT. They slow down. So once that floodgate opens up, well, a quantum computer is 178 million times faster than the fastest laptop we have available today. It's 10 times fast. It's 100 times faster than the fastest supercomputers that are available today that are processing all this. Once that happens, it gets more fascinating and more terrifying, because then what's holding us back from, how do we cure cancer? How do we cure Parkinson's disease? How do we get clean water? How do we solve poverty? How do we get an ample food supply? How do we do all this stuff is unbelievable. We have a much better quality of life for people and much faster. The problem is it's terrifying because what happens when it gets into the wrong hands?
Yeah.
And there's no guardrails in this. So I know that's a longer answer, but the future of work is fascinating and terrifying. The thing is, we have to deal with the terrifying part because the fascinating part, it's not slowing down. There is no way. The toothpaste is way out of the tube on this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to your point on what new normal is, if there is such a thing, one of
Never
the
normal.
things
New normal
I
is never normal.
new normal, different normal, yeah. One of the things that I continually am intrigued by, both curious and I guess I could say terrified, as I work with some of my executive coaching clients who have tried to struggle in leadership roles through this pandemic and the new work that's going on largely remote for many jobs. I had a client yesterday, a new engagement I just started, and we were having our chat, and he said he's still struggling with how to do remote work. And here we are, what, 3-4 years? Well, not 4, but almost 4.
Almost.
Post pandemic. His work team is diverse over a large geographic region, and he's not confident he's found the right answer on how to communicate, how to build rapport, how to maintain morale, how to inspire and create accountability. And I'm like, on one hand, when he said that, to be honest, my first mental reaction, and I did not speak this, I said, seriously, dude, you're that far off on one side of the scale, still concerned about that. And the more I thought about it, I think probably he's closer to the truth than anybody wants to admit. I think leaders are still struggling with how to do that well.
Oh, absolutely. I spend a lot of time in there because we've, one of my previous co-authored books was, creating a great work culture in a remote world. Recruiting in the age of globalization. The first half of the book was about VUCA. It was about the world that was going to, and as Wayne Gretzky always said, you have to learn how to skate to where the puck's going, not where it is. And that was, that's what it was. I mean, here's what the world's going to be. How do all these things need to change to get there? People are still struggling, but it goes back to goes back to VUCA. It is that going back to our earlier reference do you remember when people said, I'm going to wait till the computers, I'm going to wait until the computers stop changing. It was almost, it's like, as soon as I buy this, it's outdated. And because in 6 months later, it used to be a year and a half later, or 18 months later with Moore's Law, is like, well, then now there's a newer, faster one. So I'm going to wait until the next one comes out. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And then people just get left behind. That's sort of where we are now with, leadership, the future of work, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in person, whether it's 100% remote. We don't know. We don't know what's going to work because as people are trying to figure out how to create a remote or hybrid culture, how to hire and they're forced to, because you have to hire the best people that aren't always in your backyard, or you find that, or circumstances force them to move, whatever, is while we're still trying to figure that out, there's no definitive plan. There's not. You got to realize just 4 years ago, 98% of businesses were in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden we've got this. So it's a struggle, and the technology is improving, but it's changing, it's evolving. We're trying to figure out how to do a two-way screen, basically a two-dimensional screen. But just as I said, with increased computer power, bandwidth, it's not so long that we were talking about having a green screen or a backdrop before. I will bet you that within 5 years, that may not be you and me, but there will be somebody doing a podcast like this with holograms.
Yeah.
And you and I will be sitting next to each other with the same backdrop, looking like we're both in the same place. And not everybody's going to have to do that. It may be 10, 15, or 20 years until that's mainstream. But the reality is it's still going to be evolving. And going back to VUCA, it's very complex, but it's ambiguous. There is no definitive right answer. There's not only one answer. There's not only one best practices. What works for you, Doug, may not work for me and doesn't work for our other friends. That they all need to modify. And people hate that. They want to know, if I buy it, if I change it. We don't want to have to change this every year. I got news for you. Whatever policies and procedures you put in place and what works this year may not work next year.
Yeah.
And it's got to continually evolve. So I think this ambiguity and uncertainty is not the complexity of it. It's the uncertainty and ambiguity that people really struggle with. And that's, I'm sure that's what you're working with your coaches. That's what I'm working on. How do we help people become comfortable with being uncomfortable?
The interesting thing that I've thought about, and I had my own kind of aha moment recently, because I had gotten kind of zeroed in on the work world of I guess I hate the term, but I'm going to use it anyway, the so-called white collar versus blue collar environments. And even during COVID, the blue collar folks were the ones that got dispensation. They had to be boots on the ground. They had to be out on the job site. They had to be out in the plant. They had to be, manufacturing or whatever they're doing, constructing, building, repairing. They got dispensation to not have to subject themselves to a lockdown. They were allowed to go out. And my point is this: a lot of this talk about the complexity of leadership in the new, post-pandemic world, actually a lot of it is centered on the white collar side of the equation. Why? Because formerly, they brought everybody into the office. Everybody had FaceTime. Everybody was used to reporting for work at some prescribed location. But on the blue collar side, they've been out in the field and remote forever. And so
it drives me crazy, Doug. Sorry to interrupt, but it drives me crazy. People say remote won't work. Okay, so for how many decades has your sales force been in the office at a desk? Never. I mean, IBM and Xerox, the epitome of sales forces for 70 years, 60, 70 years, were remote.
Yeah. Yeah, and very similar analogy, and that was my point. And the reason I had my epiphany, I spent some time the last couple of weeks with some business owners who happened to be in the trades. One was a large constructor of commercial space, the giant tilt wall service center type buildings. And as we walked through those properties and I met his foreman and superintendents and such, it hit me right between the eyes. It's like, you guys have been doing remote work forever. That's how you do your work. These guys don't go to the office every day and listen to you, the owner, pontificate about policy and vision and direction and all that. You've got a system for communicating and working through things. And yes, it's very project oriented, but isn't all work ultimately,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we're at a state now where there's certain jobs that people have to go to work. Certainly we have manufacturing, much manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, hospitality. So they're definitely on site, but that's going to evolve. I mean, there are processes and things that can be done even in manufacturing and healthcare. Look at telehealth struggled for a long time, and now it doesn't. And there's surgeries that are done remotely. They're not done routinely. They're done regularly. I won't say routinely, but a lot of rural areas can't get the healthcare that they need or a procedure done. So it's not just conversation. They're literally doing procedures remotely. And it certainly can be done, but it takes it goes back to the skill set and people getting comfortable with doing that. If you said to a patient, your doctor's in 2,000 miles away, they're down in Texas, but he's the best in the world. When do I get to meet him? And he pops up on a screen.
Yeah.
But it's no different than if I was sitting here and my hands were in, a robotic arm. He's just doing it remote. But so that's even going to change. Even those things are going to change. But it goes back to our example of the doctors, the physicians, the welders, the manufacturers growing up in today's world only know today's world. It's not futuristic. It's the present form.
Right. So what do you tell a business owner or a large organizational, I should say, leader of a large organizational group? What do you tell them when they look ahead and maybe hit that panic button about what's coming or what they see down the road? What's your advice?
Yeah. Well, one is it is coming. Or as I said, it's here. It depends on your frame of reference, where you are. Is that change? Again, change is inevitable. Change is a constant. That's not something new. Nobody came up with that in the 20th, 21st century. That was Hercules. I think it was like 400 BC. Had said that. So it's just happening much faster. And going back to my reference of where we're headed over the next 5 to 10 years, it's even going to be more so. So the good news is, I'd say, if we look at it from a good news is there is time to make those adjustments. And it's really a mindset. It's really mental adjustments. Depending on the industry, depending on the location. I wouldn't even say it's so much depending on your age, unless you're in your 70s, that you'd have to worry about it. But I think anything else, anybody younger than 7 years old has to take into consideration how the world is going to change and how much they have to adapt and put it in their common reference. So I've been working with the model over the last few years. And this just fortuitously came about at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's called the ACE model. And it was done through a lot of research through a couple of corporations, the UN, a couple of universities studied it as how can you help people and organizations adapt? Sure. And they looked at traditional things like what are the skills that we need to develop? And traditional skills like grit and resilience. Yes, we understand that, but grit and resilience doesn't help you progress. You keep going, but sometimes that grittiness and resilience is you keep going the way you used to do, and you end up on the wrong mountaintop or the wrong direction. I just wrote an article. I have a newsletter, a little bit about neuroscience, about our brains, and it was about how many managers, how many people have you heard? Well, this is always the way we did things around here, or I've done this for 30 years and it's always worked until it doesn't. It's a yogi thing, until it doesn't. So it looked at growth mindset. That's my thing. I don't see how anything changes without growth mindset. So whether it's coaches, how do you work with organizations? How do you get to frontline people? How do you get people to think about things differently? And not just because we've done it this way or because we're really smart or have all these degrees, is what do we need to do differently? We're going to make a few mistakes. We're going to learn from the mistakes and we're going to move on. Is that growth mindset is so critically important, because even with grit, you can be gritty, but if you don't know how to change, you're uncomfortable changing direction, the growth mindset helps. Resilience, it helps you bounce back and keep moving forward. To move in the right direction, though, you need a growth mindset. In order to do that, we need something that's really interesting. We keep talking about learning new skills, reskilling, upskilling, but we also learn how to de-skill and unlearn. And it's not technically proper because we can't do a brain dump. There's no press and delete button in our brain. But that unlearning part is, how do we train ourselves to do a new activity? How do we train ourselves to work remotely? How do we train ourselves to be more comfortable in front of a screen rather than physically in front of a person? How do we learn to do that? It's a combination of learning new skills, but unlearning what made it comfortable before. Because what you hear is, you can't collect. How many times have you've heard this in this remote work world? Is collaboration's really, really hard remotely.
Oh,
And
yeah. That's the common justification for why bosses want people back at the office.
it's not. It means it's hard for them to understand how to do it. It's not hard for the
Exactly.
people doing it, because the people
Exactly.
doing it are more productive, they're getting more done, and there's hugely successful people that are doing it remotely. Their collaboration is sky high. And then the other point is, yes, you may be in the office collaboratively and working together, and maybe it works, but what's the engagement level? How many people get frustrated with that? How many people choose not to be in that, and now you lose good talent? So the unlearning part is like super critical, but you can't unlearn if you don't have a growth mindset. And if you just have a growth mindset and learning, you still need grit, because you're going to make mistakes and you got to keep going, and you're going to have failures and you got to bounce back. And then the last one's just mental flexibility, and that's what we've been talking about. We're probably blowing people's minds here today. So anybody who was anxious before is probably completely stressed out about what the future is going to be. But it
Yeah.
was mental flexibility, and mental flexibility doesn't just mean an open mind. It means, my example is, turn on CNN and or MSNBC and Fox News at the same time, and listen to, and don't make judgment. Step back and say, I'm looking from 30,000 square feet, and this is what they're saying. This is what's going on. How do I deal with it? Having two disparate, conflicting thoughts going on in your head at the same time, because that's the same way. It's like, oh, I just listened to somebody and they said everybody's coming back. If you listen to Elon Musk, everybody's coming back to work, and Jamie Dimon, everybody's going to be back in the office in 3 years. And then you turn your head and turn the dial a little bit, and it's like, no way. 60%
Right.
of everybody will be remote. How do we make sense of this as a leader? And it's that ambiguity. And it's like, okay, what works for us? The question is, how do we make this work for us in the future? Not today, because what works today is not going to work in 2 or 3 years. We may, I'm sure we'll handle a pandemic differently. We may have a pandemic, but we may have terrorism. We may have climate change aspect. There's going to be constant things that we're going to have to deal with. So how do we deal with this in the future? Is for people that are just saying, well, I'm thinking of selling the business in 5 years, or I heard somebody tell me the other day, I only have 12 more years to retirement.
Wow.
It's like, it just blows my mind, and I don't have an easy answer for that, and to be really snarky, but sometimes you just got to walk away.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just have to
You know,
walk
the
away.
the,
There's
the
enough people that do want to change.
the thing that strikes me in all that is, if you're owning a business right now and hearing all this, thinking about all this, what comes to my mind is the idea, the number one solution is to recruit for, train up, and have a big element of your culture be about the whole idea of adaptability. And you want to bring people in that have a personality that is adaptable, willing to embrace change, willing to, move forward if the situation requires it. Now, the other extreme of that, you can't be one of these visionary business owners that are chasing bright, shiny objects every day. It's, oh, new initiative here, new initiative there, let's go here, let's go there. That drives people nuts. But if you know your market, your industry is going to be subject to some of this volatility, you got to start today building a culture that embraces change and has a process to get everybody informed and prepared and ready to go.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because going back to this ACE model, we went through the 5 abilities: grit, resilience, growth mindset, mental flexibility, and unlearning. So those are the skills that people need. There's also the C is character, and that's personality. So it talks about things like extrovert. People are extroverted or introverted. People it looks at emotional stability. How are people highly excitable or more reserved, and less anxious? But that doesn't make you good or bad at adaptability. It's just knowing oneself. Okay, so the character part we'll take off the table here today. That's just who people are. There needs to be higher levels of self-awareness. They do need these other abilities to adapt, but none of it works in the culture. So what you said is people need to start looking at people that are more adaptable, or helping them become more adaptable. You can't do that. It's not in isolation. In many organizations, they have the right people, but the culture doesn't support them. Either. So when in the E part of the ACE is environment. Do the employees feel like they have management support, company support? Do they have their team support, which includes their manager? There's a work environment is a third measure that we look at. Are the processes and policies supportive of that? Emotional health is really a measure of psychological health. Okay, is it safe to make a mistake? If it's safe to suggest a new idea, is it safe to say I'm struggling? And that's a huge issue. And then the final one is measures the stress of the job, and this impacts it. Some jobs you just can't change. If you're a triage and you're working triage in an emergency room, if you're in a 911 contact center, if you're a first responder, the stress of those jobs is intense. And I know accountants and engineers will say, well, my job's stressful too. Yeah, but on a comparative scale, on a 1 to 10 scale, one's a 6 and one's a 10.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's understanding that. So part of it is the environment. We need to be much better at an environment, and we always can go back to how well has what we've done in the past worked. It's terrible. Employee engagement, according to Gallup, hit its highest record high of 33% of employees are engaged. It means 2/3 are not, and that's after 4 decades of companies trying to create a better culture, a better environment, and spending billions and billions of dollars doing this, and it's still only 1 out of 3 people engaged. But when they ask how many people are engaged and thriving, maybe they're engaged at work, but the rest of their life sucks. 9%. There's only 9% of the workforce that's both engaged and thriving. Now imagine, with all this change and all the stress and all the things that we're talking about, is if you create a better environment, then you're creating a safe haven. You're creating a place that people want to work, whether it's in person or remote. They want to work for you because you're allowing them to maybe not thrive, but do more than just barely survive.
Right.
And have an existence. So if you can even be mediocre at engagement and mediocre at helping people have a life and treating them with respect, you got it made. You got it made. Yeah. And that's ultimately the message. And that's really what I'm working on now. It's like, how do you help create that? And people have all these gimmicks and perks and things that they're doing, and 4-day work weeks, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a supportive culture and measure those for at least the things you can control. What you can control is you can control how well you're perceived by your company, by your employees, how well the manager is perceived, which is usually the number one fault, and the coworkers. And do you have the right policies in place? And is it psychological? Is it safe to say,
Yeah.
I'm struggling. Is it safe to try, to innovate, to try new things? You can score hundreds on all the abilities.
Right.
You
Right.
can literally ace
But if that,
your
yeah.
hiring process. We got all the right people and it's still not working.
Yeah.
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 It's the environment.
Well, Ira, we have run out of time, my friend. This has been amazing, and I've had certainly my own fun listening and paying attention here. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
You can probably just Google me. So it's Ira or Ira S, which stands for Stephen. So to differentiate. But you can, I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. Please reach out, connect with me, say you heard about me on the show. But you can go to irawolfe.com as well. And you can also go to adaptabilitytoolkit.com to learn about some of the tools that we talked about today.
Awesome. Well, as always, folks, we're going to have that info in the show notes, and you can click the links there. But one last time, Ira, thanks for sitting in. It's a pleasure to reconnect and get you here to share all this.
It's always a pleasure, Doug. Appreciate it. Hopefully it won't take us another 15 years.
Yeah, really. Well, with that, folks, we're going to bring this to a close. Thank you for investing your time to sit in with us, and we certainly hope this has been helpful. If you want to check it out, we do have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, look at the video archive. Also, more link info and details you can leverage and get access to. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.